You're listening to English with Monty, the podcast about the English language. If you're an English language learner, have a keen interest in language, or you're a teacher, then this podcast is for you. We give tips and advice and discuss topics about learning and teaching. We hope you find it fun and informative, that it gives you help and encouragement in your journey with the English language. Hi there, welcome to the fifth episode of English with Monty. Today we're going to talk about IELTS, which is the Cambridge exam, which is usually an examination for people who want to enter university, or, for example, for the medical professions, or also if you're going to Australia, for example, or Canada, I think, as well, for immigration purposes. And today Louise is joining me, who's one of my teachers at Monty, and we're going to have a bit of a chat about IELTS and kind of give you some ideas and tips about it. So hi Louise, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm good, thanks. How are you doing?
Doing well, thanks. Yeah, I'm glad the weather's good because you're in Ireland at the moment, is that right?
Yeah, the weather's terrible over here. I've come over here on holiday and I've just left the nice weather and come into the rain, but it's nice anyway. It's nice to be here.
Nice to be there. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Could you maybe give us a bit of a background of your teaching, first of all? Because we worked together, I guess it was 2014, 2015 originally.
Yeah, ages ago.
It was a while ago, wasn't it?
Yeah.
In Harrow, when we had a school in Harrow. And I guess we've just recently got back in touch, haven't we?
Yeah.
Kind of through lockdown. And then you started teaching again with me. So, can you tell the listeners maybe a little bit about your babackground in terms of teaching and how you got involved in it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've been teaching maybe 6-7 years now, I think. So, I always loved English at school and I was always good at it. And I was always passionate about reading and writing. And, it was just something I was kind of naturally good at anyway. I've always liked languages. And then I started traveling a lot, when I got to about 18. And then a couple of people mentioned to me, you could go abroad and teach English and earn money for it. And I just thought, well, that sounds perfect, sort of thing. So I did my CELTA about, 7 years ago or something like that. And then really ironically, I ended up working in England for about 2 years after that, which the whole point was I wanted to travel with it. It was good because I ended up getting a few teaching jobs where I got lots of experience. Then after that, I went and taught in a few different countries. I taught in Kazakhstan for a little while, taught in Spain, taught a bit in Italy, and then done some volunteer teaching in kind of Guatemala and a few other countries in Latin America. I've done a lot of teenagers, a lot of Italian teenage groups. I think most kind of English teachers that work. Yeah, I think any English teacher that's worked in the UK has taught, 5 million Italian teenage groups.
Yes, that's very true.
And they're great. I love them. And then I've taught kids from kind of 3 onwards. I taught 3-year-olds in Spain. That was mad. It was great.
Wow.
And then I've taught adults as well, and I've done kind of more serious exam classes. I've done kind of really informal conversation classes. I've done most things, I think, within English teaching.
Okay, sure.
And IELTS, I started teaching IELTS, I think maybe 5-6 years ago as well. I got a bit thrown in at the deep end.
Sure.
When I started teaching IELTS, I'm not going to lie, I'd never heard of it. I didn't even know what it was.
Right,
and
sure.
Just done my teaching qualification, and my boss said to me, we've got a teacher absent this evening. I need you to cover a class. I said, yeah, of course. He said, it's an IELTS class. I said, yeah. I didn't even know what it was. Okay. And then someone said to me, that's like an exam class. And I started panicking. And then I started teaching it regularly, and I kind of had to learn as I was teaching, which I think was probably the best way of doing it.
Sure. It was more accidental that you got involved.
Yeah,
in it,
completely.
But I guess you've enjoyed teaching it over that time, I guess. And then what kind of part of the IELTS exam would you say that you enjoy teaching the most?
Let me think. Probably the most enjoyable is the speaking, because it depends on the student, really. Because some students, they love writing and they love writing formal essays, but then they start panicking during the speaking exam. Some students, especially if they don't get the chance to speak English in their everyday life, that's the bit that's the most challenging for them. But I'd say overall, English students love to speak English. It's kind of the whole point. And then learning the language is that they want to be able to communicate and they want to speak like a native speaker. And that's the part of the exam where you can do that. You don't have to use formal language. You can use slang. You can use idioms and expressions, and people love learning those kind of things. Yeah, it's nice. Students just like to chat a little bit about themselves sometimes as well. And it's easy to talk about things that are relevant to you, which you can do sometimes in the speaking exam. So that's probably the easiest and most enjoyable part, I think, most of the time.
Yeah, no, I find that the most enjoyable. And I guess Also, as well, I mean, I don't know how you feel, but I think a lot of students kind of think that the speaking part of it is going to be very stressful and very difficult. But
Yeah,
for me, I always think, well, it's not too long. It's only about 15 minutes, isn't it?
yeah, exactly.
So for me, I'd kind of try and convince students that it's not a huge amount of time and just kind of focus on giving the examiner kind of your knowledge rather than focusing on the content too much.
Exactly.
So it's not normally too much of an issue, I guess, really, is it? Or it shouldn't be too stressful in a sense, should it?
No, I mean that's easier said than done. I think.
Well, that's true. That's true, isn't it? Yeah, of course.
I've always said just to students, don't be stressed, but it's like,
Yeah.
it's difficult sometimes. But it's true. Because it's the most informal part of the exam. I think students expect to walk into a room and have some terrifying man sitting there in a suit, asking them all these difficult questions. But it's not really like that. It's more of an kind of an informal chat almost. I think the biggest problem students have with the speaking exam is that they just kind of freeze. They don't know what to say. And I think they have big pauses, 5-10 second pauses, and lots of, and I think one of the biggest things is saying to them, look, say something, you know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
Even if you're talking rubbish, say something. Better than saying nothing. Quite easy just to learn a few kind of gap filler phrases.
Yeah.
Like if the examiner doesn't expect you, sometimes they'll ask you a question and you'll think, I don't know, how am I supposed to know that? Say, how has art changed in the Czech Republic over the last 50 years? So you don't have to be an art expert. You can say something to them like, oh, this isn't really my subject, or you've really put me on the spot here. If you learn like a kind of some idioms and phrases like that to say to them, they'll actually be quite impressed with that, because that's a really natural kind of thing to say in that context. And you don't have to be an expert on the topic. You just need to give your opinion on it and say what you do know. And if you don't know, it's better to say, oh, I have no idea about this, than to say nothing.
Yeah, very much so. It's using kind of fillers and like hesitation devices, isn't it? Yeah. So
Exactly.
So it kind of gives you some thinking time as well, doesn't it, before you actually answer the question? That's a really good tip, isn't it? You are able to gather your thoughts and then able to answer it how you want to answer it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So things like that, like you just said, gather your thoughts. You can, instead of just going, you can say, oh, just let me gather my thoughts, or I've never given this much thought, so let me think about that for a moment. That will get you great mark. You're not even answering the question. You're just saying something that sounds really natural and really fluent. And it's better than just going, because you're not going to get anywhere with that, really.
Yeah, sure.
So it's just saying something rather than saying nothing, I think, and not being afraid of making mistakes as well. Because I think that's the thing as well. Students, they always think, I can't make a single mistake in the exam. It's like, I guarantee you get into the exam, you're going to make a mistake. It's going to happen. Yeah. So just try to relax a little bit. If you do make a mistake and you notice that you've made a mistake, then just either correct it or use the same phrase again, but use it correctly. And the examiner will see that you've noticed this mistake.
Very much so, because I think also students as well, they kind of get into a thing where they make a mistake maybe, and then they kind of think, oh, I've made a mistake, what do I do next? And then they kind of focus on it maybe too much.
Yeah, exactly.
And then that makes you hesitate and maybe makes you nervous. So yeah. I mean, I think that's definitely a good tip. You've already given us a few good tips there. I mean, do you have any top tips that you would give to students?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's loads of things to think about with IELTS. Like, I think it can seem really intimidating. I can kind of relate in a way because of the way that I was thrown into teaching it. I was really intimidated as well, because I'm like, what even is IELTS? And then you get these big books and you've got these 100 things you have to do and 100 things you have to learn. And it seems almost like an impossible task to start off with. So I think it's just, before you start, get a really good idea of what the exam is. So there's basically 4 sections of the exam. So there's kind of 4 skills that you have to learn. And then just sit down and think about, what are you most confident about and what are you least confident about? What do you need to work on the most? And I think as well, buy a book, go online, look at all the IELTS resources and things like that. But also remember that even though, you probably need IELTS for your job or to move, etc., and it's an important qualification for you to have, the whole point is that you're supposed to be improving your English in general. Anything you can find to help you improve your English is going to improve your chances of getting a good mark in the exam. And that might not be going home and studying grammar for an hour at night. That might be going home and watching Netflix in English.
Yeah, sure.
There might be listening to a podcast, watching the news, reading a newspaper. IELTS can be quite expensive as well. You've got to buy the books, you've got to get lessons. Do a Skype chat with somebody who's a native speaker who's going to give you tips on how to speak like a native person. If you're too tired, then watch Netflix, listen to music, listen to a podcast. And if you hear a song or if you hear a word or a phrase that you like that you've not heard before, look it up. That's a new thing you got there. I'd also say, like, it is a difficult exam. There's no getting around that. It's not an easy exam. A lot of students are so hard on themselves, and they're constantly kind of beating themselves up, being really strict on themselves and thinking, oh, I should be passing this exam. I should be doing better. Like, give yourself time. Be positive about it, but be realistic as well. I know that some people, you might have a time restraint. You have to get the exam by this point. But if it's not like that, then give yourself too much time is better than not enough time, because you don't want to be going into the exam stressed and feeling like you're going to fail, because if you feel like you're going to fail, you're more likely to fail.
Sure. I mean, I think it was a good tip that you were talking about, just general things. So, I mean, I always find that it's good to just kind of enjoy the language, isn't it? Rather than feel as if you're studying necessarily. It's kind of using passive things, as you say, kind of listening to the radio or watching Netflix. So you don't even have to be concentrating 100%, do you? I think that's the important thing.
Yeah, and it's things that you enjoy as well. Listen to things that you're interested in. Like, trust me, a lot of the IELTS topics you're not going to be interested in. Some of it is really interesting and some of it's just boring,
That's very true.
Some of it's like, for me as a teacher as well, I'm like, oh God, this is so boring, So try and find ways to make it interesting. Like that's kind of what I try and do as a teacher, is try and make the boring subjects interesting. You are going to be bored sometimes. For example, some people don't like sitting down and learning grammar. You are going to have to do some of that. But then if you do have to do some of that, then reward yourself by watching your favourite programme afterwards in English or whatever it is. And yeah, exactly, enjoy the language, because the whole thing is, it might be really hard work, but at the end of it, trust me, if you get a good score in your IELTS exam, like, you can speak English, you don't have to ever doubt your ability, because it's quite a difficult thing to do. You should be really proud of yourself, even just attempting it. And once you've done it, you don't need to worry anymore. Students, they really are hard on themselves. You remember, like, English is not an easy language to learn. It's really not. And yeah, exactly. Enjoy the language. Remember that it's not just about the exam. If you're living in an English speaking country, this is going to make your life a lot easier. You're going to be able to communicate with people more. As well as that, I think just be kind to yourself, because let's just say you do the exam and you fail the exam. It's not the end of the world. And then actually, you've done the exam, and the next time you do it, you 100% know what to expect. So you'll have an advantage over the other people sitting the exam. Give yourself a bit of time. Don't be too hard on yourself. And I think, remember, especially with the speaking part, fluency, I mean, accuracy is important, but fluency is really important. Just try and speak as much as you can with as many people as possible throughout the day. If you can get a part-time job somewhere, do that. If you haven't got one already, if you can go to a language kind of exchange.
It's about confidence, isn't it, really, in that sense?
It's completely about confidence, yeah. I mean, you get students whose English is great and they keep consistently failing the exam because they get in there and they think, oh, I don't know how to speak English, because they don't do it every day.
Sure.
They freeze. Speak English every day, however you can. Even if you're sitting in your room talking to yourself, who cares?
It's true, isn't it? It's just about practicing it, isn't it? And even if it's listening and repeating things, I think that helps, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You think about, like, kind of audiobooks are quite a good thing, because if you're kind of following the text, but also you're listening at the same time and even trying to copy what the person is saying, I think that's quite a good thing to do, just to use the language, isn't it, really? And obviously use it in a way that is pronounced very clearly. I think that's a good way of doing things, isn't it? You've reached the midpoint of our podcast episode, and we thought we'd ask you a quiz question about the English language. Which country contains the largest English-speaking population in the world? We'll answer the question at the end of the podcast, so stay tuned. What do you think about the idea of putting yourself in an examination environment and trying to almost do like an exam on your own? Do you think that's a good idea, to get the timings right and things like that?
Yeah, I do think it's a good idea. Always good to practice, especially with the listening exam. I think it's really important to practice, because some of the exam, it's almost more important to know the format of the exam than it is to have brilliant English in a way. There's kind of tricks that you can learn. It's like the listening or the writing exam. If you know the correct format of the essay, that's kind of half of the battle, really, in a way. And it's really important. For example, if I'm teaching students, I always give them essays to do at home, and then sometimes they'll come back and they'll give me this like amazing essay with these brilliant vocabulary and it's perfect, and I say to them, wow, that's great, how long did it take you to write it? And they'll say, oh, I planned for an hour and then I wrote it, and then my boyfriend checked it, and then I wrote it again, and it's really good to do that. But at the same time, in the exam, I mean, obviously you're not going to have an hour to plan. You're not going to have your boyfriend there to check it, so it's kind of do that, take 2 hours, 3 hours to write the essay. But then as you go on, do it in exam conditions, because it's a completely different thing.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, it's just as in it's trying to get used to those timings, isn't it, really? Because, I mean, I think at the beginning, what I always find is very much at the beginning when I'm starting off the process with a student, I'd say, look, don't worry about your timings, just get the process and understand the process. But as you go along, you need to start thinking about those timings, don't you? And also think, okay, well, I'm going to have to spend 2 or 3 minutes planning this before I actually start. And also I find you've got to give a good at least 3 or 4 minutes or 5 minutes at the end in order to check over what you've written.
So important.
That is really important, isn't it? And that's also part of the timing, isn't it? Because I think a lot of people who are very capable and are very good at writing, they often make, like we all do, I mean, even native speakers, we have to check over our writing, don't we? You always make little errors, or if your email, for example, you make typos and things like that. If you can give yourself that time and make it at least kind of 3 minutes at the end of the essay to check everything over and maybe look for your common mistakes. Try and get familiar with kind of common mistakes that you make. And then when you're scanning through, you're looking through quickly, you can hopefully identify those mistakes quite easily.
That's a really good point. You're kind of getting to know the way that you work. And like, I think especially you can do it with the speaking and you can do it with the writing as well. Say you've got a teacher, before you give it to your teacher to correct it yourself. Even if you're not sure, identify things that you think might not be right, because that's the way that you learn. I think with the speaking as well, something that I do with my students that they kind of hate but love at the same time is I'll sometimes record them speaking. I mean, everybody hates listening to themselves speaking. I'm going to hate listening to this, I want to listen to it back.
You get used to it, but you
get used to it. Yes. You get used to it. And people are very, very self-critical, which is not good. But sometimes it can be good because you're listening and you can hear the things that you're saying wrong. And you don't hear it when you're saying it. You only hear it when you listen back. Record yourself speaking about a topic for 2 minutes. Listen back and notice, what are you not pronouncing correctly? Have you got a lot of gaps? The other thing is vocabulary is really important. You can say the speaking part where you talk about something for 2 minutes. You can say everything correctly and perfectly. But if you're using adjectives like, oh, it's big, it's nice, it's beautiful, it's not going to get you great marks, because you need to use more descriptive adjectives and vocabulary. So start thinking about synonyms you can use.
Think about register, and also think about looking at a thesaurus maybe online is quite useful, isn't it? Completely. So you can type in obviously nice or beautiful and things like that, and then it should give you some more, descriptive adjectives. I guess also another element, I mean, I don't know what you do on this side of things, but I always think that if you can introduce a grammar point that's, relatively complex in some way into your speaking. So for example, a second conditional idea. So if I won the lottery, I would buy a big house. So that kind of idea, or even kind of something simple like the present perfect. So I have recently been to the park. I think that really helps, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Because you're kind of demonstrating what you know.
I think that's a really good point. Like, especially for the speaking exam. On the one hand, try to be fluent and just talk as much as you can. But at the same time, especially if you're a confident speaker, especially if you're someone who's not too worried about the speaking part of the exam, it's quite easy then to rely on easy vocabulary and not push yourself, because you feel like, oh, I'm fine, I can talk well. But if you can kind of, like you were saying, use more complex grammar, especially like in the third part of the speaking exam, they'll often ask you about something in the past. How has this changed over the past 50 years? And it's like, instead of just saying, art was this and now it is this, don't do that. Use the past perfect, use the present perfect, use the past continuous, use used to, use would, because this is a really good opportunity for you to show that different types of grammar, and use different sentence structures as well. Remember to use short and long sentences, and that's the kind of thing where you can gain marks really easily just by practicing.
No, very much so.
I mean, how long have you been teaching IELTS?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm trying to remember, actually. When I first started off teaching, which I guess if people have listened to the other episodes, I started off in Italy. But yeah, in Italy, I didn't actually teach IELTS. It wasn't until I came to London and started off in London teaching IELTS. So I've been teaching since 2005, but I probably didn't start doing things like IELTS until maybe 2010 10 or something like that. So it was relatively late on because I came back from Italy in 2010.
Yeah.
So I didn't really get involved in that kind of thing until a bit later on. But yeah, I mean, it's something that I enjoy very much. I think it's very rewarding as a teacher, isn't it? Obviously, when your student passes, and by them passing, it means that they can go to university or they can get the job that they want. I think that's a really satisfying thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it varies a lot between people. But what are the easiest things do you think people can do to get better marks in the exam? You know, like we were saying, like just check your work. Really simple things that can get more marks. What do you think?
Yeah, sure. I mean, checking your work is obviously a really important point, isn't it? And timings, really. I mean, I think a lot of the time with an examination, it's not always about your level of English. It's often about how you manage your time, which would be true in any exam, but it's also just being very conscious of that idea and try and kind of compartmentalize. So put things into small sections within the exam and think, okay, in this part, I need to spend 10 minutes and no more than 10 minutes. In this part, 5 minutes or whatever it is. But also as well, kind of being in a situation, again, this is good exam practice, is if you see a question and you are not sure about it, then just move on to the next question. And come back to it later on. You can be in a situation where you look at a question and you're like, oh, that's really difficult. I really don't understand this. And then you start to panic and then you spend more and more time on it. And then you end up kind of wasting time on something that you don't need to. And then often if you kind of move on to the next question and then come back to it at the end, I think you normally have a bit of clarity on it maybe, or kind of processed it while you've done the other questions, and then often it becomes easier.
Yeah, sure.
And I suppose also being conscious of the number of marks, isn't it? Because obviously if something is just 1 mark, then it's better to spend more time on something that's 2 marks, isn't it? I mean, it sounds pretty obvious, but it's kind of just being conscious of that idea, isn't it, really? But yeah, I mean, that's how I would feel about it. I mean, we've kind of probably covered most others I would have mentioned. I think in terms of thinking about it as an exam, but also kind of just trying to enjoy the exam, which sounds like a bit of a ridiculous thing to say, but in some way try and enjoy it.
I think at least enjoy the process. If you can't enjoy the day of the exam, at least enjoy the process leading up to it, because I think it can be fun in a way. It doesn't have to be boring. It doesn't have to be stressful. And if you look at it like that, then it is going to be boring and stressful. I think kind of look at it as an opportunity. If I pass this exam, I'm going to be able to communicate with everybody. I'm going to be able to get a great job. I'm going to be able to make loads of friends who speak English. I'm going to be able to do whatever I want. And, there's so many fun things about learning English. It's not all boring. It's not all stressful. There's, like I said, it's watch YouTube, whatever, like read Harry Potter, do whatever it is that you are interested in. Just do it in English. If you don't know a word, look it up. If you don't know a phrase, look it up, and then you got something new that you can use. One thing I didn't mention as well is, especially with the listening, there's often they'll use a lot of different accents. Because I mean, most people are used to kind of standard English accent and standard American accent. But I don't know, watch Coronation Street, watch something that's set in Manchester. Watch EastEnders, watch Gavin and Stacey, get used to how people speak in Wales. The regional accents are really interesting as well as useful for the exam, and learn more about the culture that way. And
well, but I think that's also a real key, isn't it? I mean, I don't know about yourself in terms of language learning, but I always found really learning a lot about the Italian culture when I was there really inspired me in terms of language as well, because kind of the more you get into the culture and the more you understand about the culture, it kind of makes you want to improve the language more, or it makes you more curious and want to speak to people more.
Totally.
I mean, I think anytime you think about a language, I think culture is important, isn't it? And try and understand the culture either where you are or where you're planning to go. I think that's definitely a good thing to think about, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. And just speak to as many people as possible about as many things as possible. And just don't be scared, because I think a lot of students, IELTS or other ways, they're scared to speak because they're scared to make mistakes.
Yeah.
But I mean, we all make mistakes. I make mistakes in English all the time. It doesn't matter, as long as you're speaking, people aren't going to laugh at you, People aren't going to laugh. People are going to appreciate that you're trying. Maybe people, if you ask them to help, they'll help.
Yeah.
And I think even though it seems intimidating, the more you do it, the less scary it is.
Very much so. I think that's probably one of the best things to say to people, isn't it, really? The more you do it, the less scary it becomes, because I think a lot of the time people are want to stay in their comfort zones, don't they?
Yeah.
And that's kind of a normal human reaction. I mean, we're all like that. We all want to feel comfortable, don't we? But at the beginning, it's particularly difficult, but
Yeah.
kind of the more and more you do it, the less scary and the less difficult it becomes. And then I think you start to get a sense of kind of reward and satisfaction from going outside of your comfort zone, don't you?
Completely. We kind of have this ridiculous fear. It's like, because I learned Spanish, and I kind of, at first I was like, if I say something, someone's going to laugh. And then I said it and they didn't laugh. Of course they didn't. People aren't going to laugh at you, And you start to realize, wow, I can actually communicate in another language. It does give you confidence. It's hard for people coming over to, for example, coming to London, a huge big city, and trying to get a job or trying to meet people, and English is their second language. And it can seem really intimidating, but the more you do it, the more you realize that it's like a secret code in a way. It opens so many different doors, and it just allows you to get into so many different situations. And it's wonderful being able to communicate in another language. And the IELTS is just a secondary thing in a way. It's kind of a gateway to a lot of other things. Just remembering that it's not the end of the world. It's not the be all and end all getting the IELTS qualification. Sometimes it is, you might need it for your course, etc., etc. But if you look at it in a wider sense of just, I want to be able to communicate better, you're not putting so much pressure on yourself and on the exam. You kind of have a more holistic approach to it, I think, then you're more likely to do better in the exam.
I think that's good, isn't it? To have a wider vision of it, definitely. And I suppose if something is very essential to progressing your career or something, it's trying to give yourself enough time so that you're not stressed or, kind of rushing everything at the last minute, isn't it, really? Okay, let me ask you one final question. Are there any kind of teaching tips for teachers at all that you have?
Yeah, I think kind of funnily enough, it's the teaching tips, I'd say, are kind of similar to the tips for the students. Like, think, don't be intimidated because it seems like you need to know everything and learn everything, but it's kind of just take it a section at a time. Sometimes for me, when I first started and I was looking at some of the reading sections and there was words and I didn't know them, I'd never seen them before, these scientific words or medical words. Don't worry about it, it's okay, you can always look things up. Always, if you're going to give your students, for example, a piece of reading an article or something to look at, always look at it before you give it to them, because trust me, there's going to be a word in there you don't know and the student's going to ask you what it is and you're going to panic.
Sure.
And you're going to be
like, oh my God, I'm a native speaker, I don't understand this.
Yeah, you're going to feel like an idiot even though you're not, because you might make up an answer that's not even true.
My technique was, I was taught this early on, was, I suppose you've probably been told this as well. If you don't know it yourself, you push it back to the student and you say, what do you think?
Yeah.
And then...
That's a really great question. It's a really good question. It's a really interesting word. What do you think it means? And then they'll tell you and you go, that's okay. Well, I'll tell you what, for homework, you look it up, write in a sentence and come back to me, and then you look it up, and then you know the next lesson and you pretend you knew the whole time. That's what I do anyway.
Yeah.
Well, I do that all the time.
A good tip, isn't it?
Yeah, I do all the time. And I think for me, the biggest thing, because I went from teaching big groups of teenagers and playing loads of games and doing loads of fun interactive activities to this big intimidating IELTS textbook with all these people who needed to learn for their degrees and stuff. And all the students are sitting there looking very serious. And I thought, I need to be very serious. And then I realized, no, I don't actually. I can make this fun. I can play games with the students. They might not want to be running around the classroom or anything, but I can get cards or I can get little board games and I can make this interactive and I can do fun speaking activities and we can laugh in the class. We can make it funny. I can tell them, go off and watch this funny program, can talk about it together. What slang did you learn? And it doesn't have to be boring. It can be just as fun and interesting as any of your other classes.
Yeah, I think that's the key, isn't it, really, as a teacher, is to try and make it fun, isn't it? If something is fun, then it's engaging and people don't realize they're learning something because they are having fun. So I think that's a good tip. You
want your students to look forward to going to your class.
Very much so, yeah. We'll probably wrap things up now. So thanks very much for coming, though. I mean, I think that was really interesting. I hope that the listeners found that useful. I think there's a few good tips in there and a few good general ideas. And if you are interested in doing IELTS or you have any questions about IELTS, then drop us an email. It's info@monteenglish.co.uk. Also, as well, we do online conversation classes in small groups. We do that through Meetup. That's meetup.com and then /Monty-English-conversations. Also, that's another thing that you can get involved in if you would like to. Thanks very much for tuning in. And thanks a lot, Louise. I really appreciate coming on, and hopefully we can do something again in the future as well. Tune in next time to English with Monty. Bye-bye. Remember our quiz question from earlier on about which country contains the largest English-speaking population in the world? The answer is very interesting, in fact. It's India. Apparently over 350 million people speak English in urban areas, so pretty impressive. See you soon.